If you go to the back of your Home Depot's lumber section, you may find the discount cart. At mine, anything that's on this cart that has a purple mark on it is 70% off the normal price. If it's on the cart but has no mark, that means it's free. A lot of the material is on the cart for a reason. It's warped, bent, or broken in some way. But some of it is perfectly good, perhaps cut off from a larger piece, which are typically free, or salvageable by cutting out the bad part. I always try to go buy the discount cart whenever I go to the Home Depot. I'm mostly interested in the stuff I think is usable that I can grab for free. And the reason I mention it is because the wood that I use in this project is stuff that I got free from the discount cart. We have this area on the side of our house where our gas meter and a spigot is. And at one time there was a simple wood border around this area, but it rotted out a long time ago, even before we bought the house. And it's sort of been an eyesore that's bugged me for a while. So I finally got around to doing something about it. The first thing I did was clear out the weeds and some of the old rock and take some measurements. I used a protractor to get the angle of the right-hand side and used an angle gauge to set my miter saw to the correct angle for the cut. I don't show it in the video, but I did the same thing to get the angle for the end that sits against the house as well. All the other cuts were either straight or simple 45-degree cuts. I did have to cut a notch out on either end of the board to account for the siding on the house, and I was a little aggressive and probably cut these notches too big. I also had to cut a notch so the border would fit around a pipe that's coming out of the ground. The pipe just houses a shut-off valve. I kept it simple with attaching all the pieces together by just screwing them together. Later during the final assembly I did add glue, which is probably unnecessary, but I did it anyway. You could actually stop here and have a perfectly nice border, but for me it was missing something, so after getting it assembled I measured the frame in place so I could add a top border to it. Now, here's where using the less than premium lumber is made clear. The front board had a twist in it, and I knew about it going in, but I left the dressing how to fix it up until this point. There are probably a million ways you could fix the twist, but what I did was to add a wedge on the left-hand side so that the boards all sat more or less flat. It's not necessarily a pretty fix, but by the time you add the top border and the angle that the whole thing will be viewed at most of the time, it's hardly noticeable. Now you could screw the top part of the border in from the top, but I didn't want the screws to show. So I used a Forstner bit to drill about halfway into the main 2x6 and then screwed the top border in from the bottom. Just a note, when drilling this deep with a Forstner bit, or any bit for that matter, you want to be sure to drill a little and then pull the bit out so that you can clear out the chips. There are a few times I thought I gotten the bit stuck because I didn't clear the hole out often enough. Now, one thing that's actually sort of peripheral to the actual project, but I thought I'd include it anyway, was that the spigot that sits inside the border suddenly became too short when the border was in place. And I was originally just going to leave it, but I decided to raise it up just a bit to make it easier to use. I've recently come into using both thread tape and pipe dope on any threaded connections, particularly larger ones. In this case, this is 3/4 inch pipe. I have this really nice pipe vise, which actually came with our house, and I absolutely love it. It's very handy for doing assemblies like this and many other things. I'm assembling the pipe extension and spigot separately so that I can get the coupling and spigot on and tighten down without having to worry about the orientation of the spigot. Then when I go to attach the assembly to the main line, I just have to tighten between the coupling and the main line, ensuring that when it's tightened down enough, the spigot is facing the right direction. I think this also saves the amount of torquing you have to do on the main line, which I'm keen to avoid doing too much of. I don't think it was strictly necessary because it seemed to stay in place just fine on its own, but just in case, I added some blocks on the inside of the frame and used some rebar to anchor the frame into the ground. I used the rebar just because I didn't have large enough stakes on hand. You'll notice the use of the pipe vise again to hold the rebar while I was cutting it. I put some garden fabric down to help keep the weeds away. Then it was just a matter of filling it with some river rock. And the final touch was to actually add the garden. And if you want any more information on these metal yard art flowers, I will put a link in the description. They come in all kinds of different sizes and stuff, and they're really neat. So anyway, thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.